Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into an ancient text that frames all of life as a fundamental choice between two paths. We're in the 10th chapter of Proverbs, and let me tell you, it does not pull any punches. It draws this really stark, high-stakes line between a life of wisdom and a life of foolishness. And we're going to break down exactly what that looks like.
Right off the bat, the whole chapter kicks off with this one powerful line. And look, it's not just about family drama. This verse is basically the key that unlocks everything else. It sets up the central conflict you're going to see over and over. Our actions have consequences, creating these ripples that bring either joy or grief, not just to us, but to everyone connected to us.
Okay, so it's really important to see Proverbs 10 not as just some random list of inspirational quotes, but more like a detailed character study. It's building these two opposing archetypes who walk through life on completely different journeys. The text calls them the righteous and the wicked, and pretty much everything that follows is a direct side-by-side comparison of how these two types of people think, speak, and act.
So here it is, the fundamental difference laid bare. You've got the righteous path, which is all about security and ultimately leads to life. And then, in stark contrast, you have the wicked path. The text calls it crooked. It's deceptive, and it's a path that conceals violence. So you can see this isn't just about being good or bad in a simple sense. It's about the very nature of your journey. Is it stable and life-giving, or is it fundamentally deceptive and destructive?
So how does a big, high-level idea like that actually play out in the real world? Well, the text immediately brings it down to something incredibly practical that we all deal with, our work ethic. It argues that your approach to work isn't just a habit, it's a direct reflection of which of these two paths you're walking on.
I mean, it really doesn't get much clearer than this, does it? Lazy hands lead to poverty. Diligent hands bring wealth. What's so striking here is how it basically removes luck from the equation. In this worldview, prosperity isn't just some random thing that happens to you. It's presented as the natural, almost predictable outcome of consistent, deliberate effort.
And the text just doubles down on this idea. But it adds another layer: timing and foresight. The wise person, the prudent son, acts when the opportunity is ripe. He's out there gathering crops in the summer. The foolish person, they completely miss that critical window of opportunity, sleeping right through the harvest. So it's not just about working hard, it's about working smart and knowing when to act. All right, so from the work of our hands, the focus shifts to the power of our words. And this is fascinating, because these proverbs treat speech as way more than just communication. Words are framed as these tangible forces, like actual tools that can either build a life of immense value or just tear everything down.
This really forces you to stop and ask a personal question. In the marketplace of life, what's the actual currency of your speech? Are your words creating value or are they a liability? The text offers a very, very clear-cut answer.
I mean, just look at the language here. On one side, the righteous speaker's tongue is like choice silver. Their words are a fountain of life that actually nourish many. There's real tangible value there. Now compare that to the wicked speaker. Their heart has little value, their mouth conceals violence, and all their chatter just leads to ruin. The message is pretty unavoidable. Your words don't just communicate ideas, they reveal the true worth of what's inside your heart. And all of this, your work, your words, it all leads us right to the core of the matter: character. The text is basically arguing that your work ethic and your speech are just the outward expressions of your inner nature. And ultimately, it's this fundamental character, your integrity, your wisdom, your very being, that determines the entire trajectory of your life. In this worldview, character is destiny. And right here is where we see the great promise and really the great warning of the chapter. If you walk in integrity, you walk securely. And why? Well, because there's nothing to hide. But a life built on crooked paths, on deceit and dishonesty, is just inherently unstable. The text promises this kind of ultimate accountability. You will be found out. So to make this a little more concrete, the text paints this vivid picture of the fool's mindset. And notice how all these traits create this self-destructive feedback loop. It's not just that they make mistakes, they actually find pleasure in wicked schemes. They spread slander, which then leads to their own ruin. And maybe most critically, they ignore correction, which makes it pretty much impossible for them to ever break the cycle and change their path.
So, after all this, where do these two paths ultimately lead? We've seen the massive differences in work, in words, and in character. So now we come to the final act, where the text lays out the inevitable and very different consequences of choosing one path over the other.
If you had to boil this entire chapter down to just one sentence, this would probably be it. The wages of a righteous life is simply more life. But the earnings of a wicked life,
They're defined as sin and ultimately death. The stakes really couldn't be higher. They're presented as absolute.
And the contrast in these final outcomes is just so dramatic. The righteous stand firm forever, and their prospect, their future, is joy. But the wicked, well, their hopes come to nothing. And they're described as being gone when the storm has swept by. Even their lifespan is put in contrast, with the text stating, "The fear of the Lord adds length to life, but the years of the wicked are cut short." It's just this incredibly powerful picture of permanence versus total, complete collapse.
The whole comparison ends with this final, powerful image. The righteous are like a deeply rooted tree. They're stable, secure, permanent. The wicked, on the other hand, have no such roots. They're temporary, they're transient, and they will ultimately be displaced. It's really the final stark metaphor for stability versus impermanence. So after all that, what are we supposed to make of this? Proverbs 10 presents a world of really sharp contrasts and crystal clear consequences with very little room for nuance. And that leaves us with a final question to chew on. In our modern world, which so often feels complex and full of gray areas, what is the value of a guide that presents wisdom in such stark black and white terms? That's something to think about.